Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are located on planet Earth. It's time for the Morning PulseWave Report with yours truly, Dexty Algo Capitalist, aka The Vulcan, coming to you live from PulseWaveTrading.com, home of the world famous PulseWave Price Trigger Reports. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not have the PulseWave Price Trigger Reports, I have no idea what you're doing with your life. How you going to trade without these reports, man? You can't. You need to stop bugging and you need to come see me over at pulsewavetrading.com so you can get hooked up. There's no other way to say it. You need to get hooked up. All right? That's what I'm talking about today. All right, so as you know, I'm sure you've been paying attention. The markets are mixed and are all over the place this morning. Stock indexes in particular, they don't know which end is up. They literally have no idea about what's going on, and they're stuck. They are truly and utterly stuck. And there's a reason for this. And I think one of the biggest reasons for this is that we have the Fed still in the forefront of the news cycle. There have been meetings, seems like they've been meeting every day of every week. And that hasn't slowed down yet. So every time minutes are coming out of these meetings and OPEC meetings, and there's just so many meetings after meetings after meetings after meetings after meetings. And, you know, people get a little bit weary of this and they want to know truly, without any games, where do we go from here? What's really good? What's really going on in the world today? And I have to tell you, I don't blame them. There's a lot of information floating around. Some of it will literally make your head spin because it's just so much talk. And they say talk is cheap, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. This is these are the conversations that have to be had. They really have to be had because what is on the line if these talks don't happen? I think, like I've been telling you, all week, I think America is probably going to be toast. There are so many things that have to happen in order to make that not happen. And unfortunately, I do not see those things being carried out right now. I do not see those things happening. The things that need to happen to prevent catastrophe are not happening. And I think we have to begin to ask ourselves a question: why is that? Why aren't the supposedly representative, the people that represent this nation that were voted to take care of the nation's best interests in heart, why are they not doing that? Why are they not taking the country's best interests at heart? Why are they only in it for themselves? Well, that's exactly what you see happening. Remember, the government is made up of the people. All right. It's not an alien entity. It's people. All right. Now, I know some people would argue that it's not alien entities, but we're not going to go into that right now. Suffice it to say, I believe that uh, they there's a lot to be talked about in those regards. I really don't get into that too much here in these broadcasts, as you know, but I don't avoid them either. I know that there are issues that need to be talked about, dealt with, and I do my best on a regular basis to talk about these things and to deal with things, because you can't just stick your head in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist or that it's just going to go away. It's not just going to go away. It's like a festering wound that has been left untreated. You can't do it. You can't just leave things like that. You have to deal with them, and you have to address them as they come. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I can only go by what I see. And I truly believe that the markets tell us pretty much everything we need to know as we need to know it. The only question is anyone really paying attention to what the market is saying, what the market is telling you? And the majority of people do not pay attention, and they do not care, and they do not watch. And there are reasons for that. Some people don't understand. They don't know what they're looking at. And they don't even know and understand why they should care. So there are a lot of different things that got us to where we are in the world today. And we're going to look at some of those issues today. First of all, you got the Dow up 142 points on the futures. You got the S&P E-mini, S&P 500 futures down 2 points. And then you got the E-mini NASDAQ 100 futures down 93.5. And the Russell, my hustle futures are up 26 points. You see the mixed bag there? Only the Russell and the Dow are positive. The NASDAQ and the S&P are negative. Then you got gold down $12.70 an ounce. You got silver down 41 cents. You got crude oil up $1.57 a barrel. And you got the Bitcoin Futures Composite Index up 4,115 points. Nat gas unchanged. Soybeans down 7.5, corn down 8 points, and wheat down 10.25. And then you got your long bond futures down 1 5/30, 1 full point and 5/30, as bond futures continue to plummet. U.S. dollar index still holding that $90 handle. We're at 90.82. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, we are at a crossroads here. Now, if you examine just what's going on with these bond prices, like I've been covering for you on a daily basis, the bond futures are not doing what the economists are saying that the economy is doing. And what appears to be a backtrack of the recent ECB sentiment on the rise in global rates, European central bankers apparently see no need for drastic action to address the situation, at least according to the officials familiar with the internal discussions, as BBG so aptly put it. The gist of the argument is that if verbal intervention appears to be sufficient to contain the backup in yields, there will ultimately be no need to follow through with actual bond buying. This logic certainly resonates. However, the effectiveness of verbal intervention is inextricably linked to the credibility of policymakers and investors' faith in follow-through. A case in point would be Bill Clinton in the 90s. He was the #1 cheerleader of the stock market as we, at that time, was fueling the biggest bull market in U.S. history. And he did a wonderful job cheerleading along with Alan Greenspan, then the Fed chair. So by walking back the recent mantra of concern, the ECB is bringing into question the central bank's actual reaction function to such a switch back up in real yields. Investors are operating under the impression that the spread between concern and action is much narrower than the overnight headline suggests. No drastic action is warranted at this time. Case in point again, bond futures down more than a full point this morning. We'll sidestep the credibility and policy era arguments and instead highlight the overnight weakness in treasuries that saw 10-year yields once again touch 1.45% before spiking as high as 1.48% ahead of the AUDP print this morning. As for the Fed, Bernard's comment suggesting the repricing is at least on the minds of the committee, even if the current characterization of higher rates is a positive development as it reflects improving growth and inflation outlook, or so they say. Now, much has been said about the current leg of the sell-off being driven by growth as opposed to inflation expectations. In other words, real yields increased while break-evens have been steady. This leaves higher rates more vulnerable insofar as historically elevated inflation expectations can persist regardless of the realized data for longer than growth ambitions can diverge from real-time economic performance. In other words, as these bond futures keep dropping in price, yields have nowhere to go but up. The nature and magnitude of stimulus during this particular cycle has set the stage for "it's different this time" arguments, particularly as it relates to the elevated savings rate. Now, January surge in U.S. savings from 13.4% to 20.5% was unquestionably a function of government transfers, stimulus checks and unemployment benefits. This implies that, as with the previous peak in savings seen during the early stages of the pandemic, savings will drift lower as the reserves are worked through in favor of consumption. With many frontline service sector firms still suffering, millions of displaced workers are effectively living stimulus check to stimulus check, as it were. This is by design, and the entire purpose, the fiscal bailouts, are to create a bridge to the new normal for those hardest hit by the pandemic. And once again, this is by design. This is not something that is happening organically. This brings up one of the most topical debates among market participants at the moment, and that is the amount of stimulus in the system, including the upcoming round from Washington, too much, too little, or just right? Well, I've covered this for months and years on this channel, and that is every time they do a stimulus, it takes about 18 months to filter through. But because the market has been doped up on this now for 20 years without respite, now instead of 18 months, it takes a little bit less than 18 weeks, and not even that. You have to continue. It's gotten to the point where when they do a stimulus, there's no knee-jerk reaction in the market anymore. Not really. So are they really doing anything? Worries about accelerating inflation, bubbles, and the necessity of higher yields implies policymakers have overshot. No kidding. It's impossible to know precisely how much stimulus was needed until long after the fact. However, the timeline to returning to the new normal is essentially engaging how much bailout funding has been needed and is going to continue to be needed. Said differently, if COVID disappeared tomorrow, then there is too much stimulus. If the economy is still in lockdown in 2022, there is not enough stimulus. Now, throughout the last year, as estimates of the length of the journey to a post-pandemic world increased, additional fiscal efforts follow intuitively. With the vaccine now developed and distributed with different channels worldwide, investors can see the proverbial end of the tunnel. Kind of. But not really, because they've been telling you that this is the new normal and you're not going back to the old normal. Questions, ladies and gentlemen. This is a dangerous game, but the market will be looking to Powell for greater clarification sooner rather than later in this regard. And better believe if the market doesn't get the answers that it wants or that it likes, then that's going to be a wrap for the bull market. And speaking of lack of trust in governing bodies, how about complete loss of trust overseas? Half of French home health workers say they'll resist taking the vaccine. Astounding new figures out of France suggest what is no doubt a broader global trend of hesitancy and skepticism when it comes to current big pushes to vaccinate all. Reuters, in covering the country's vaccine rollout, finds that merely around half of health workers in French care homes do not want to be vaccinated, even after many of these routinely witness the ravages of COVID-19 on the elderly and infirm. Which begs the question, was this something scientifically designed to do just that? Cull the herd, starting with the elderly and the infirm. There's a complete loss of trust, one home health care worker stated, and a trade union representative was cited in the report as saying, reflecting resistance to the growing pressure put on often underpaid staff in difficult working conditions who are being ordered to get vaccinated lest they risk the safety of the elderly patients. And another reflected a common answer of, I'm going to wait a bit. Let's be honest, it takes about 5 years on average to bring vaccines and such to market. But these were rushed. So we have no historical precedents as far as the long-term effects of these shots. Now, the intense skepticism and pushback stems from the fact that it's both the government that's reportedly underpaying them while also demanding they get the jab. Again, this is socialism live in action for you. Doesn't matter if you want to call it democratic socialism, socialist socialism, Republican socialism, whatever term prefix you want to put on it, this is socialism in action for you. Now, Reuters presents a common refrain from the frontline caregivers as follows. Mary France Barrett, who works in France home for the elderly, watched a patient suffocate to death in front of her because COVID-19 had affected his lungs. But when her employer offered her a vaccine against the virus, the nurse hesitated. Quote, I have some doubts, said Barrett, 48 years old. I prefer to wait, end quote. The trend is also being observed across Europe, raising deep concerns about health officials that the elderly population remains at great risk to the degree that the large portions of health workers refuse or at least delay the jab. But hold on, because see, here's where the contradictions come in. If you're taking all the necessary precautions, you're doing the masking and the gloving and basically walking around in a hazmat suit, doesn't that supposed to bring the risk down to almost zero? We've been told if you wear 2 or 3 masks, wear the gloves, and put on body armor and walk around in a hazmat suit, that you're going to be fine. So why the push for the vaccine for people who are healthy? Well, they run the risk to get that, but how do they run the risk? You said, and I quote, wearing multiple masks is supposed to be effective. You also said that maintaining a 6-foot distance, social distancing, is supposed to work. So now this begs the question, why are you saying something other than what you already said it, which is called a contradiction? You said multiple mask wearing, gloves, and social distancing work. But now you're saying that's not enough. So you're saying that it really doesn't work and or is not as effective as working as you said it was. Either way, we have a contradiction that needs to be cleared up because you're not making any sense in that regard. And if the elderly are the ones and the infirm are the ones to get the shots first, and get vaccinated first, then it shouldn't matter if the healthcare workers get it if all the elderly have been vaccinated, right? Aren't we safe to assume that every elderly patient in a nursing home has been vaccinated or will be the first to be vaccinated? So if all the elderly in a particular facility have been vaccinated, why do you care if the healthcare workers get vaccinated or not? Clearly, the elderly are no longer at risk. They've gotten the vaccine. And the workers are still wearing triple masks, medical gloves, hazmat suits, whatever, and they're still doing social distancing. They're doing everything that Dr. Fauci said they should do. So the risk now is brought down to zero. So what's the problem? I'll tell you what the problem is. They're trying to line you up. Now they want to line up healthcare workers. They're going to use the healthcare workers as being vectors of disease to force and mandate everyone getting it, whether you want it or not. I wouldn't be surprised if they start jailing people for refusing to get it. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, think about it. Doesn't that make you go, It's the same situation that we have here in the States. Every time there's an outbreak of flu or measles or mumps or anything of that regard in a public school system, they want to blame the quote unquote anti-vaxxers. But you and I both know that in most states, especially the ones that I lived in, it was mandatory. You could not attend school unless you provided the proof that you've been vaccinated. That's right. It is mandatory. There's no way around it. It's mandatory. So if something is breaking out in a public school where it is mandatory that every child in attendance has been vaccinated, how are you having an outbreak of any kind among your students? No one is asking that question. Isn't that a glaring problem? Shouldn't questions be asked? What do you think? If you did a little bit of digging, you'll find the majority of outbreaks in public school systems over the last 20 years have been among those who had been so-called vaccinated, not those that had not been vaccinated. They don't want you to know that. But if you do a little bit of digging and research, you'll find that all these outbreaks were done by children who were vaccinated. And so to not shed light on that aspect, they flip the script, control the narrative, and blame anti-vaxxers. That's what happens when you control the narrative and you control the media. You get to say what is factual and what's true and what's not. But that is exactly how societies are imprisoned by their own government. The whole world will one day be like Hollywood. How is that? Well, just think about it just for a little bit, okay? You've seen documentaries and you've seen interviews about people who live and work in Hollywood in the film industry. And you've seen the talks and you've seen people discuss the bizarre behaviors and trespasses of Tinseltown on a daily basis. It's been covered upside down every which way. Not too much has been left unsaid. But every once in a while, you'll find that events in Hollywood reflect much more pervasive dynamics in the culture than you would think. Now, When we say Hollywood, we're not only just talking about the physical location, we're referring to the entire corporate empire of Hollywood, including Netflix and other streaming companies that may not work completely out of LA. They're all funded and run by the same people anyway. Hollywood and the corporate cabal behind it have long sought to be the center of America's cultural universe. Let's not forget that when we say people and entities that make up Hollywood, you have to include, yes, ladies and gentlemen, the CIA. Don't forget, they run Hollywood. Can't forget that either. There have been dozens of movies made that were funded and written by them. All right? Can't forget that. Okay? In other words, they have been seeking to pervert the natural dynamic so that life imitates art instead of art imitating life. And if they control all the art, then they control people's perceptions of life. Now, the concept of manufacturing consent, all right, has been talked about by people like Noam Chomsky. That plays a role here, but I think it goes far beyond that. Rather, Hollywood seeks to not only manufacture consent from the public, but also to manufacture the public's relationship to reality. They don't just want to keep you in an obedient posture, heads down, and begrudgingly accept their ideological zealotry. No, no, no. They want you to believe that their way is and always was the only way. All right? If you just take a cursory glance at the film industry and in the corporate world in general, today it's complete and unfettered propaganda, nonstop, 24 hours a day. We have moved beyond the phase of subversively hidden manipulations to a new stage in which the propaganda has become blatant and aggressive. Almost every new movie and television series, not to mention most commercials, are rife with leftist distortions. You will be hard pressed to find any content these days that does not push ideas like endless feminist platitudes, mentions of patriarchy and white privilege, ridiculous exaggerations of racism in America as if nothing has changed since the days of Jim Crow. Or how about oppression of women, rape culture, etc., as if all the tenets of the first and second wave feminism have not already been accomplished, depicting oppression of women where none actually exists. Women consistently portrayed as overtly masculine, with traits and abilities that defy their biology. Or how about men consistently portrayed as weak and feminine, i.e., metrosexual? Or how about masculinity and strength, competition and merit portrayed as destructive, toxic, and outdated? Or how about common positive feminine traits such as nurturing, child rearing, homemaking, portrayed as obsolete or oppressive? Or how about forced and unrealistic diversity, which misrepresents the actual statistical racial makeup of the US population and other Western nations? Oh, that's not enough? How about saturation of gay and trans representation? A tiny percentage of the population is made to appear as if it is as vast a movement that inhabits every person's daily experience. They wish. Or how about older generations cast as confused and ignorant, or removed from film and television completely? Or how about younger people portrayed as wise leaders, cleaning up the messes of older generations, somehow blessed with extensive knowledge and experience by mere virtue of their youth? Or how about history completely erased and rewritten to reflect modern leftist ideals? Again, if you control the media, you control the narrative. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. Representation in itself is not a bad thing, but when it becomes a weapon, when you weaponize it, and then it's used to twist fundamental truths for political gain, then it's a problem. None of the concepts that I just mentioned are an accurate reflection of the real human world. No reflection of reality whatsoever. Instead, they seek to make the outliers into the mainstream, and they seek to take normal human biological and physiological and psychological standards and portray them as aberrant and wrong. Yes, there are cases where Hollywood is dabbling in fantasy and science fiction, and this could be used to rationalize some of their odd depictions. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about force feeding the public an obvious agenda across the full spectrum of storytelling. These are not just movies. These are not just TV shows. This is not just storytelling. This is propaganda. This is brainwashing. MK Ultra mind control techniques. Hollywood is not in the business of making art. They are not even in the business of making money anymore. Rather, they are in the business of indoctrination. Yes, it is a conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, but conspiracy reality. Again, you cannot dispute the evidence. The facts and the truth speak for themselves. Their job is to make the public believe that leftist ideals, or in some cases, globalist ideals, are the prevailing ideals and the only valid ideals. If you see the same lies every day in every manufactured depiction of life, you might start to think that your more rational, traditional, and grounded views are in the minority. You might begin to self-censor for fear of being ridiculed. Peer pressure is a powerful thing. You might even join the other side just to avoid being attacked. In order to maintain control over the propaganda machine, a very important factor is ensuring that the faces on the screen are never allowed to deviate from the party line. You got to stick to the script. You got to stick to the talking points. You got to stick to the approved wording. Your puppet and pet celebrities need to be kept under lock and key. Like most people, I recently watched Ben Shapiro's interview with Gina Carano, and it basically confirmed everything I already knew about Hollywood. All right. What was striking, though, was the extent to which the Hollywood corporate elites seek to rape the minds of their employees and force them to submit to the cult. It wasn't that Carino was fired for posting a historical fact on Twitter. It was everything that happened before that. We see corporate diversity training, such as Coca-Cola's Be Less White seminars, and we are disturbed by the cultism and manipulation. But listen to Carano's story, and you'll realize that Hollywood is far ahead in their exploitation of social justice controls. Carano mentions that as soon as she began speaking her mind from a conservative position, Disney and Lucasfilm began to bombard her with representatives, publishing agents, etc., whose mission was to convince her to stay silent or apologize publicly for her personal statements. They even tried to force her to endure a mass admonition in front of 40 trans people because she refused to post her pronouns to her Twitter page. This is often referred to as a struggle session in communist circles, a crucible used to berate and destroy people who dare step out of line. It is also used to strike fear in the hearts of anyone else who might be thinking about voicing independent views. Independent views are not allowed. You have to stick to the script. Struggle sessions were the primary tactic, folks, employed during the Cultural Revolution in China as a means to pacify the citizenry and erase all ideas that oppose Marxism. The film Red Violin, produced in 1998, is one of the only films I've seen that accurately depicts the ravages of the communist social sterilization. This is what happens when big business or government align with the leftist cult. This is their religion. The elite have always known that if you use man-made religion, you can control the masses even easier. Think about it. They would have no power at all if it were not for the backing of corporations and government institutions. You want to know why so many celebrities these days seem desperate to virtue signal online all the time? It might not be because they agree with the leftists. They may just be trying to keep their jobs and avoid being suffocated by a weaponized mob. What the interview with Gina Carano really revealed was the extent to which Hollywood corporations are involved in that mob. Remember, folks, it's not about making money anymore. It's about pushing the propaganda. All right? Companies like Disney aren't following the mob's lead. Instead, they are using the mob as a tool. The same way George Soros and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation use Black Lives Matter. They use that mob as a tool. They are leading the social justice cult. The cult is not leading them, as many wrongly assume. Follow the money, people. The money leads. Price always leads action in the market. After finishing the Carano interview, could not stop thinking about a show from the 1960s called The Prisoner, starring Patrick McGoohan. It portrays a man who works for the government and abruptly quits, only to be kidnapped by a nefarious unknown organization and transported to a place called The Village. The Village is a sprawling complex made to look like a happy seaside vacation town on the surface, but underneath is a vast surveillance grid. All the people that live there are trapped, watched constantly, and the group that runs the village uses elaborate mind games to break the prisoners down. The village operates by turning prisoners into informants and guards. Its goal often has nothing to do with making people talk. Instead, the goal is to get prisoners to submit, to get them to love the village and become a part of it. The village is not a prison. The village is an experiment, a microcosm of what the elite want for the entire world. Hollywood is the village. The way Carano was essentially stalked by her own employers and prodded with struggle sessions and mind games, the way that Hollywood operates behind the scenes, is exactly what leftists and corporate elites intend for the rest of us. It is already happening to some extent. How often have we heard conservatives labeled as insurrectionists, terrorists, and racists in the past year alone? How many conservatives have been censored by big tech platforms? How many have lost their jobs because of their opinions or simply making factual statements? The social justice cult and the corporations that control them want the world to be Hollywood. They want the environment of oppression and fear to become the standard. They want everyone to be afraid to speak. They want everyone to be afraid to disagree. They want everyone to be afraid to step away from the agenda in any way. Everyone must play their part to perpetuate the fantasy world. Everyone must battle to appear virtuous and pure for the mob. Everyone is an actor pretending they love their new totalitarian collective. There is a huge weakness to this strategy, though. All of it depends on people's aversion to loss. If you are afraid to lose something, just like in the trading world, we call that being risk averse, then that something can be used to control you. Karana was not afraid to lose, and so she could not be controlled. And I commend her for that. For example, she has set for others a standard that is far more valuable than any work that she might have done by submitting to the Hollywood cult. If only the majority of people would do the same, our civilization could change for the better overnight. All tyranny is an illusion predicated on fear within the minds of the enslaved. So do not fear, ladies and gentlemen. Just wanted to leave you with something to think about today as you go forward. There is a way out. You just have to resist and stand your ground. With that being said, remember, smash that like button so I can get a gauge of how many people actually care about these videos, and share it with someone. You never know who it may encourage or help or wake up. And remember, bulls make money, bears make money, and pigs get slaughtered. So remember to take what you can and give nothing back. And I'll see you guys here tonight with the end of day PulseWave report. Peace.